Okay, so it is a GPS workshop, so I will be giving that to you guys, the survey at the end. And we'll go over all of that good stuff in a little bit. Like I said before, I'm Misty Woolard. I'm the Writing Center coordinator. And today we're going to be talking about APA style, everybody's favorite. So, welcome to the APA style professional development workshop. We're going to be talking about how APA relates to other citation styles, why we cite sources and how we cite sources, basic formatting requirements of APA, the link between in-text citations and the reference list, and then how to effectively approach and use APA style in a paper. So that is a lot to go over in a very short amount of time. So let's get started. What is APA? APA stands for the American Psychological Association, and its rules were created by the American Psychological Association and can be found in the APA manual. The manual provides guidelines for writing as well as proper documentation of sources. The first APA manual was published in 1952, and APA puts out a new manual every couple of years. Right now, we are currently using the 6th edition manual. Why do we use APA at Full Sail? You may have used another documentation style in the past, maybe MLA or Chicago. So why do we use APA at Full Sail? It's the accepted citation style for businesses, and it accommodates the wide range of disciplines studied here. Because you guys study so many different fields in the entertainment business, we use APA because it just is kind of an umbrella for all of it. Are you guys able to hear me? Okay, give me 1 second. Um, okay. Let me double check one thing. I got one person saying they can't hear me, but it doesn't look like it's a problem for everyone else. So that's good at least. Okay. So one thing that you guys do need to know is, if you're not aware of it yet, you will be required to use APA style for every research assignment that here at Full Sail. So every class has at least one assignment that you use research for, and you have to use APA for those assignments. So I would definitely get familiar with APA. This workshop is a really great way to do that. If you're still struggling with APA after the workshop, I would definitely recommend that you come and make an appointment at the Writing Center because we can help you a little bit further. All right, so why do we cite sources? The biggest reason we cite sources is just so that readers are able to distinguish between our ideas and information and ideas taken from outside sources. That means that we get credit for our own ideas and we give appropriate credit to the ideas of others. When a paper lacks citations, readers assume that all of the ideas belong to the writer. If ideas in the paper belong to an outside source and have not been properly cited, this may be considered plagiarism. When we cite sources, we also show that we've taken the time to research and to really understand this process and the field that we're discussing. Utilizing and citing research allows us to support our own ideas, and it also makes our arguments more credible. Any information that comes from an outside source needs to be cited. So this can include quotes, paraphrases, summaries, images, audio, video games, computer software, and any other media. If you're citing an idea or a piece of work that is not your own, it needs to be cited. So how do we do that? That's kind of our next step, right? So quotes, means that you've taken a word-for-word passage from an outside source, and you have to cite all quotes in your paper, obviously. But there are other things that you might also use in your paper that need to be cited, and they're a little bit trickier for most people than the straightforward quote. A paraphrase is when you take a fact or idea from an outside source and you put it into your own words. So you read something and you learn something new, and then you want to explain that or tell someone else about it. That's your paraphrase. And again, you have to cite all of your paraphrases, even though you've written them in your own words. And then the other thing that we often talk about is a summary. Now, a summary is when you put the main idea of a piece of writing into your own words. The difference between a summary and a paraphrase is that in a paraphrase, you put a specific idea or fact from a piece of writing into your own words, and a summary is the whole idea behind, or the whole, kind of the main point of the paper. Again, summaries also must be cited. All right, so what about things like audio and video, images, and other media? These also have to be cited. There are two different ways to cite media. One is a citation style to use when you're discussing a piece of media in a paper, and another citation style to use when you actually include media in the presentation. We'll talk about both of those in just a little bit more detail later. All right, so what does not need to be cited? We don't need to cite common knowledge, and obviously the very next question is, so what's common knowledge? Ideas that are available in a variety of sources or generally accepted facts, such as pollution is bad for the environment or writing is a process, those are both considered common knowledge. If you can find the same information undocumented in at least 5 credible sources, it's a good bet that it's common knowledge. It's important to note that if you read an article and you remember a fact from that article, that's still not considered common knowledge. If you read an article and you remember a fact from it and you tell your best friend the fact and they go, yeah, I knew that, everybody knows that, it's still not necessarily common knowledge. I see this a lot when people are writing about famous people. Students will often think that because they know a lot about the famous person that other people do as well. And so like Beyonce's birthday must be common knowledge. Well, I don't know when Beyonce's birthday is. And to double check, you probably looked it up. So you need to cite that for us. Other things that don't need to be cited include findings from preliminary experimentation. So this means experiments that you conducted yourself don't need to be cited. And original audio, video, and images that you created also don't need to be cited. I will say that if you are ever questioning whether something needs to be cited or not, I would be safe and cite it. All right, in the next section, we're going to talk about kind of the bare bones of APA style and talk about some of the formatting requirements of an APA paper. The idea here is that if you can remember these kind of bare bones, you are going to be off to a really good start for most of your APA papers. There are 3 major elements of any APA paper. There's the title page, your in-text citations, and your reference list entry. There are other elements that are not always needed or are not always necessary, like the abstract. We'll talk about the abstract, but again, guys, it's important to remember that abstracts are not always required. All right, so first let's talk about the title page. This is what your title page should look like. Give me 1 second. I actually have a link for you guys that I want to give you, if I remember where I saved it. This is a YouTube video for how to create a title page. It's very helpful and it walks you through the steps much better than I could. The other nice thing about this is if you take that link and you bookmark it, next time you have to write an APA paper, you can just play that YouTube video and be reminded of how to do it. I always forget how to make my title page. I always have to play around in Word until I remember how to do it. But that video should help you guys. Okay, so let's look at the elements of the title page. First, every title page has a header, and on your title page, your header is slightly different than the rest of the pages in your APA paper. The words running head are followed by a colon, and then the title of your paper in all caps appears flush left on the header. The page number should appear flush right on the header. Again, you have a different header on your title page than you do on the rest of your document. On the rest of the pages, you'll drop the words running head and the colon and just put the title of the paper in all caps. Next, we have centered about halfway down the page, you have the title of your paper, and then your name gets its own line. And then finally, the name of your school is the last line. The next thing that would come in your APA paper, if it's required, is the abstract. Usually abstracts are only included with longer research papers, such as thesis papers. And when required, the abstract is a brief summary of your paper that immediately follows the title page. The abstract should be double-spaced. It should include the page header with the title of the paper in all caps, flush left, and the page number flush right. And the word abstract should be centered. You don't want this bolded or underlined or in quotation marks or anything like that. The abstract should be no more than 150 to 250 words. This will vary based on your assignment requirements. Again, if your instructor wants an abstract, it would usually be included in your assignment instructions. If it's not included, then you probably don't need one. You may also include keywords in your abstract. They're listed at the very bottom. You indent as if you're starting a new paragraph, and then you type the word keywords in italics, and then your keywords are listed after that. All right, the next two parts of the APA paper are kind of the ones that we spend the most time on. They are the in-text citations and your reference list. APA style calls for both, and they're not particularly useful if you don't have both. So they kind of go together. We like to think of them as like milk and cookies. One makes the other a little better. All right. In-text citations are used in the body of the document. An in-text citation specifies which source a particular piece of information, like a quote or a paraphrase or a summary, is from. And the reference list appears at the end of the document and gives detailed publication information about each source cited in the document. If we didn't have in-text citations, we wouldn't be able to identify which ideas in a paper came from an outside source and which ideas came from the author. And if we didn't have the reference list, we wouldn't be able to find the references used throughout the paper. So again, those two, the in-text citation leads to the reference list, which then can lead your reader to your actual research. In the next few sections, I'll be going through a lot of specific details about formatting for in-text citations and reference lists. Don't feel like you have to memorize everything. It's a lot of information, and honestly, it's really going to be nearly impossible for you to memorize all of this. Hopefully what you will have by the end of this presentation is an understanding of the types of things you need to be quoting and citing, and then how to find those, how to find the information that you need so that you can quote and cite correctly. I'll show you some resources where you can find the same info that I'm covering now. All right, so in-text citations. What should the in-text citation look like? And the format for in-text citations can kind of vary depending on whether the information cited is a summary or a quotation or a paraphrase. So we're going to cover all three of those. There are two basic formats for in-text citations, and this is true whether you're citing a quote, a summary, or a paraphrase. The first example is a quote from a Writing Center blog post, and here we've used a signal phrase. This means we've included the author's last name in the sentence after according to. We put the date in the parentheses immediately after the author's name, And then the page number, or in this case, the paragraph number, follows in a parentheses at the end of the sentence. Because we don't have a page number, because it's an online blog that we're quoting from, we've used the paragraph number instead. When we put the author's name in the sentence like this, it's called a signal phrase. And then the second example is another way to create an in-text citation. We don't have a signal phrase. Instead, we put the author's last name, the year, and the page number or paragraph number at the end of the quote. Either format is acceptable, and if you look at them, you'll see that the pieces of information that they each include are the same, whether you're using a signal phrase or the more basic format. And you'll also notice that the information comes in the same order. So in the signal phrase, we have Chapman 2012, and then at the end of the sentence, paragraph 4. And in the more basic format, we have Chapman 2012, paragraph 4. Again, it follows the same order. All right, so let's talk about quotes specifically. In APA style, there are two formats for citing quotes in text. One format for quotes is for quotes under 40 words, and the other format is for quotes over 40 words. This is an example of a quote that's under 40 words. And again, notice that what we need are quotation marks surrounding the actual quote, the author's last name, the year of publication, and the page or paragraph number. And then periods appear at the very end of the citation. You'll notice that the paragraph, the parenthetical citation is included in the sentence in this example. If the quote is 40 words or more, we must use a signal phrase to introduce the quote. In this example, we've used Chapman 2012 states, which is followed by a colon. We don't need quotation marks, but the quote is indented and starts on a new line. An interesting thing about APA is in this format, and only this format, the period appears at the end of the sentence rather than at the end of the citation. We haven't done it here either, but a thing to keep in mind is if you omit words, phrases, or sentences within a quote, be sure to use the ellipses. All right, so we've looked at quotes. Now let's look at paraphrasing. In this example, we're citing a paraphrase. We used an idea from the article we're citing, but we didn't use a word-for-word quote. We put it into our own words. So we still need to include the author's last name as well as the year of publication, but with paraphrases, it's not necessary to cite the page or paragraph number. And now we're going to look at a summary. You'll notice that the summary is very similar to the way that we cite a paraphrase. We still need to cite the author's last name and the year of publication, but not the page or paragraph number. All right, so what happens if we encounter a tricky source that doesn't include the information we need to create an in-text citation, like the author's name or the date or the page number? How do we handle those sources? Well, let's talk about it. We've got a couple of different ways we can. If there's no author listed, you can use the first few relevant words in the title of the article or book in the place of the author's last name. The title should be in quotation marks. An interesting and important thing to think about when you're doing this is whatever comes in the kind of first spot in your in-text citation should also be the thing that comes in the first spot of your reference list, so they're easy to find. So if the other thing you can do if there's no specific author listed, but the information comes from an organization or a company's document or website, you can use the organization or name of the company instead of an author's name. So if you were quoting something from the Food and Drug Administration, or you were quoting something from the National Weather Service, something like that, you could use the organization's name instead of an author's name. If no date is listed, we use the abbreviation ND, which means no date. Again, it just follows, it goes in that same spot. If we're using a signal phrase, it would come behind the author's last name in parentheses. And if we're using the parenthetical end citation, it would follow, again, the author's last name. So often page numbers, like we've discussed, are not available for, especially if we're citing online sources, which we do a lot. So if you don't have a page number, you should cite the paragraph number. For example, if the quote was in the second paragraph, you would cite para 2. If the quote were in the 15th paragraph, you would say para 15. That does mean that you're going to have to number the paragraphs in your online resources that you're using, which can be kind of a pain, but that is what you need to do. If you're citing a paraphrase or a summary, again, we don't need the page number, so we also don't need to include the paragraph number. All right, let's move on to the reference list. It's the third major element of the APA paper. We're going to start by looking at formatting requirements. So, like every page, it needs a header. The header should look like the rest of the headers in the paper, with the exception of the title page, with the title of your paper in all caps flush left and the page number flush right. References, the word references, should be centered at the top of the page. Again, this isn't bolded or italicized or underlined. And then sources should be listed alphabetically by author's last name. If an author has more than one work, organized by date of publication. And then the reference list should be double spaced with no extra spaces between the sources. Every line after the first line of each entry should be indented. This is called a hanging indent. And I'm going to give you guys another one of these great YouTube videos that shows you how to format the hanging indent. If you have questions on it, I would say, again, just bookmark that YouTube video and watch it when you've got a few minutes. And then the other thing is that electronic sources should include clickable URLs. All right, so let's take a closer look at reference list entries. The first step in deciding how to cite a source is to decide what type of source you actually have. Is your source a book or a magazine, a newspaper article or a journal, a website, a personal interview, a YouTube video, or some other type of print or electronic source? APA has very specific rules for citing different kinds of sources. However, each entry, regardless of the type of source, will contain the author's name if known, the title of the work, and the publication information. Again, that's the place where we start really, it changes based on your source. So it's important to identify the type of source you have and then look for a specific example of how to cite that particular source. For this example, we're looking at a reference entry for a blog. However, if we were citing a book or an online newspaper, the citation would have a different format. Notice that we list the author by last name and first initial of first name. In this example, we have a single author, but your source may have multiple authors, no author, or an organization as the author. Again, depending on the type of source and the type of information you have about that source depends on how you cite it. The date in parentheses comes after the author. In this case, we're citing a blog, so we need the complete date, including the year, month, and day. For some other types of entries, you only need the year. So again, be sure to check for specific examples. And then notice that only the first letter of the first word in the book or article title is capitalized. Every word that comes after that first word begins with a lowercase letter. Proper nouns are the exception to that. They're always capitalized, as is anything that comes after a colon. So if you'll notice in our example, we have the focus on APA colon, what needs to be cited, that what is capitalized because it comes after the colon. And then again, each line after the first line is indented. And for a blog citation, we have to note whether it's a web blog or a blog comment. That's found in brackets. And then for any electronic source, we need a URL, and the words retrieved from are followed by the permalink to the source. So that's kind of the basic entry. Let's talk about some tricky ones, just like we did with our in-text citations. So if no author is listed, let's pretend that the article we looked at there wasn't an author and we weren't sure about the organization that released it. So we move the title of the article to the front of the citation in place of the author's name, and then we have the date, the weblog, and the retrieved from. Again, if you use Focus on APA or the title of the article in this as the author spot in your reference, that's also what should be in your in-text citation. And then if you decide that you're going to use the organization as the author, for instance, we know that this blog is put out by the Full Sail Writing Center, that moves to the that goes into the place of the author's last name. And then the final one is, let's pretend that you don't have an author or a date listed. So we use the article title, and then after the article title, we say ND in those parentheses. All right, so we have talked about how to cite ideas used in a paper, but what if you're citing media in a paper? For example, let's say we're in a photography class and our instructor asks us to find a photograph online and discuss its composition. We aren't including the image in the paper, we're just referring to it. How do we cite that? If you're referring to a specific piece of media in your paper, then you need to cite it in APA style using both in-text citations and the reference sheet. And this is the sample for an image. So you need the artist's last name and the year that it was released or finished. And then for your reference list entry, you need the artist's last name, the first initial, the year, the title of the work, what type of work it is, that's what that format means, and then retrieved from with the URL. You also must cite other media like videos, music, computer games, video games, TV shows, if you refer to them in your paper. There are specific reference list entry formats for each of those types of sources as well. All right, but what if you actually use the media? It's the piece of media. If you're actually using media in a presentation, like an image or a video taken from the internet, you also have to cite those. There are a couple of things you should think about if you are using media. You want to check the copyright license to make sure the image is licensed for reuse under Creative Commons. You need to include an image URL on each slide where the image appears in the presentation. For instance, if you look at the bottom left of this slide, kind of like right above where the chalk line is, or where the chalk would go on this board, there's a URL listed there. It doesn't have to be large, but it does have to appear on each slide. And then you have to include a reference slide in APA style at the end of the presentation. So here's an example of that for this presentation that we're doing right now. All right, so how do you find images? There are actually a couple of different places that are really great to look for images. I will pull those up for you guys. No, that's not what I want. One of them is compfight.com. I'll post the URL in the chat log as well. What's nice about Compfight is that you can find all different types of images here, but it's also nice because they have their frequently asked questions and you can kind of educate yourself about photo licenses and things of that nature on this page. And you can search based on those photo licenses as well. So if you haven't familiarized yourself with Compfight, I definitely recommend it. And then the other thing that I wanted to show you is if you log on to Connect, and you go to the library's databases. Um, you can search for the library here, and then you come down and you go to research databases, right? We actually have some really great image databases that Full Sail pays for the licensing so that you guys can access them. The images collection is really great. This will have a lot of things like photos from news stories and things like that. Or if you are looking for specifically, maybe you're writing a paper on art or something like that, the Oxford Art Online is one of the most comprehensive online references for visual arts worldwide. So there are a lot of really great ones here. If you're looking for an image, if you're looking for images to use. So I want to pause for just a minute and talk a little bit about some APA tips because, as I'm sure you guys are very, very aware, APA has a lot of specific rules and it can feel really intimidating when you're trying to learn them and you're trying to follow them um, because it's just a lot to remember. But here's the thing, you don't have to remember all of them. Follow these simple tips and you'll be well on your way to citing your sources properly. First, become familiar with the basic elements of an APA paper, which we more or less just did right now. Second, you want to pay attention to your instructor's requirements. Is APA required for the assignment? How many sources has your instructor asked for? Do you need to include an abstract? And if your instructor is asking you for a requirement that you haven't seen before, ask for more clarification or make an appointment with the Writing Center or use some of the resources that I'm going to give you guys. Um, my third piece of advice is always use a manual as a reference. They're available in the library. You can find them online. They're really, really great to have. Um, and then beyond the manual, you can also always use online APA resources. I'm going to show you a couple because they're kind of my favorites. I'm actually going to show you two specific ones because they're my favorites. I really love the Purdue OWL, which I always forget what I always just search for it, but I'll give you guys the URL. The Purdue OWL is really great for all sorts of things. They've got really wonderful kind of general writing tips, research and citation, and then really great things like if you want to make a resume and you're not sure where to start, the OWL has an online has that kind of information as well. Their APA information is extremely detailed. You can find a lot of the answers to your questions here. I will say that it's a little overwhelming sometimes. It can be a little bit tricky to use and you kind of have to wade through a lot of information. The information is there, but again, it's tricky and you have to wade through it. But this is the other one that I definitely recommend using because all of the information is presented in a really easy to use way. Again, I'm putting this link in the chat. This was actually designed and created by an English instructor at Full Sail, specifically looking at the Full Sail students' needs. So it has in-text citations. It covers all of those things that we discussed, like formats of quotations, paraphrases, and summaries. If you have a work by multiple authors, how do you do that? Works with no dates, direct quotes, personal communications. This is all how do I format my in-text citations? It's all right there. And then it breaks down the reference entry lists by the type of reference that it is. So I am going to quote a movie. How do I actually do that? I want to discuss this movie. And there are examples of how to do that listed. Some of these examples under audiovisual media can be a little bit harder to find on some of the other online resources. So I love Project APA for that. It just pulls them right out and it's really great. Then you have an APA paper format. You can download one. You can download a template to make your APA document properly. And then the APA frequently asked questions. This is a really great website. Um, I can't, I use this all the time when somebody asks me a question on a reference that I don't cite often. Um, I come straight to Project APA. This, and then my biggest, like my final tip, um, no, I'm sorry, I have two more. Always check to see that your formatting and in-text citations and reference list entries match up to examples that you found elsewhere, specifically on a place like the Purdue OWL or in the APA manual or at projectapa.info. Um, Even if you've used um, like a citation machine or something like that to create your citations, double check them against the manual and these other resources, because sometimes those citation machines or the ones that do it automatically are incorrect. And then this is my final piece of advice is when in doubt about a documentation issue, ask your instructor or make an appointment with the writing center. Your instructors would much rather talk to you guys about how to cite a source than to have to talk to you about the fact that you did it incorrectly. That is not a fun conversation to have. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, ask your instructor, see if they have any tips for citing sources. And if you feel like you need a lot more help than that, definitely come and see us at the Writing Center. For more information about the Writing Center, you can visit our website on Connect. Just like you go to the library, you know, you just search for library, just search for Writing Center, and we show up. Um, Actually, I suppose that it wouldn't be a bad idea to show you guys the Writing Center's Connect page because we have a lot of really good stuff on there. Um, you can make an appointment on the Writing Center's Connect page, or you can fill out an appointment request form. But beyond that, we keep a blog where we post things like our workshops, but we also post things that might help, like blog posts on when do you use quotation marks or italics for titles. This is a question we see a lot, so we did a blog post about it. There are also some really great things like PDFs on different grammar issues. We have videos that we post. If you're looking for APA help or creative writing help, so I highly recommend using the Writing Center's Connect page because, again, there's a lot of great information there. Um, that is kind of my spiel, but I want to open it up to you guys. If you have specific questions or you're curious about anything, or I just didn't cover something in depth enough, you can either, it's usually easiest to just put it in the chat um, box. But yeah, if you have questions at this point, uh, let me know. So we have a question. Essentially, the citation system works like MLA. Yes, the point of the citation system is exactly like MLA, but it's the same concept, but it's a different context. So what I mean by that is you have in-text citations and you have a reference list and you have a title page. MLA has all of those things as well, but the specifics are very different. Um, MLA, you include things like the author's first name as well. Um, the emphasis is different in MLA. The year of publication is not included in text citations because APA is focused on things like science and business. Science and business, if you're looking at reports that are 5 years old, you are well out of your range of credibility usually for science and business. You want the most up-to-date findings that you can research. Um, so that is why we use APA rather than MLA. What's the standard for business currently? Shannon, could you go into that a little bit more? Do you mean like which citation style do businesses tend to use? Yeah, APA is most likely what you will use. Um, Unless you end up in a field like academia, and even academia uses APA pretty regularly. That is, thank you for bringing that up, Shannon. Again, that is why Full Sail wants to teach you guys APA, because it's the citation style for businesses. All right, does anybody have any other questions? All right, well, while you guys think about it, I'm going to see if I can get that professional development survey for you guys. Um, Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope it was helpful. Again, I'll stay on here for a little bit longer in case anybody has any other questions. Um, but if you do have, if you ever come up with questions, let me know, and we can set up an appointment for the Writing Center. So this is the link, as Austin mentioned in the chat box. You do have 1 hour to complete the survey. Um, So please do that when you have a couple of minutes. And like I said, I'll be here for a little bit longer if you have any other questions.